Preparing for the Day After is a photojournalistic treatise on disaster mitigation published by me, Malini Shankar, and Walter Keller for the 10th anniversary of the Asian tsunami. Today's chapter is on media guidelines for reporting on disasters and disaster preparedness. It is chapter 18 in my book. But let us first recap what we have learned in the previous book reading sessions before starting tonight's session. Water and sanitation is central to developmental discourse. Culture-sensitive food security also has evolved out of local agro-meteorological conditions prevalent in an area. Livelihoods based on local agro-meteorological conditions are the best means of ensuring livelihood security. Climate change adaptation, menstrual hygiene, especially for indigenous tribal women, solid waste management, universal healthcare access, sustainable development goals, they are all factors to be included in the development agenda. Media personnel have to be trained in reporting disaster preparedness or the lack of it at district level. This disaster is the impact of a calamity on the human landscape. This includes the impact on lives, livelihoods, livestock, and landscape. Tonight, we will start with a chapter on media guidelines for disaster reporting and disaster preparedness. Tonight's session is part 1 of this chapter. That the media has an onerous responsibility hardly needs reiteration. We have learned in the preamble of this book that if 24/7 television channels were knowledgeable about tsunami and had broadcast the tsunami occurrence in Nicobars and Sumatra, thousands of lives would have been saved, at least in Tamil Nadu in India and perhaps in Thailand and Sri Lanka as well. The lesson learned from that experience is that media personnel need extensive training and participation in refresher courses on many aspects of earth sciences, natural calamities, as well as in disaster mitigation. In the day and age of climate change, media reporting on such crucial issues would assume critical responsibility. In the roughly 2 hours between the earthquake and the tsunami's arrival in Sri Lanka, Thailand, and mainland India, many people could have escaped the coast in time had they been given ample warning, says the WHO report called Tsunami 2004, a comprehensive analysis. That link is coming up anytime now. It also will be there in the description box below the video. On 26th of December 2004, the Indian Ocean tsunami or the Asian tsunami and the earthquake that triggered it killed more than 250,000 people, including the dead and missing, and displaced 2 million people. Had public awareness and preparedness for tsunamis been greater in the Indian Ocean region, the number of lives lost and the damage caused by the tsunami possibly could have been lesser. Had a similar tsunami occurred in the Pacific Ocean, it is likely that more people would have been warned of the tsunami's approach and escaped from its path. The Pacific Ocean contains 6 tsunami sensors. There were none in the Indian Ocean basin. The Pacific Ocean also contains nearly 150 other water level instruments such as tide gauges that report real-time data via satellite. The Indian Ocean contained only 4 such devices, 1 near Australia's Cocos Island and 3 in the Maldives. All 4 of the sensors were located more than 1,700 kilometers from the epicenter of the earthquake. Additionally, a Pacific Tsunami Warning Center with a tsunami alert system monitors possible tsunami-generating earthquakes and tsunami using the sensors. No such center or alert system existed for the Indian Ocean, says the WHO report called the Tsunami 2004, a comprehensive analysis. However, a report of the Ministry of the Earth Sciences of the Government of India, called the Preliminary Assessment of Impact of Tsunami in Selected Coastal Areas of India, compiled by the Department of Ocean Development, Integrated Coastal and Marine Area Management, Project Directorate, Chennai, and hosted on the website of the Ministry of the Earth Sciences of the Government of India, that link just came and went by, clearly cites that the tide gauges of the National Institute of Ocean Technology did record the first tsunami waves in Port Blair. National Institute of Ocean Technology's buoys had started recording the swelling of the 6 minutes after the mega earthquake. Quote, National Institute of Ocean Technology, Chennai has deployed acoustic tide gauges at selected places along the Indian coast and Port Blair in the Andaman Nicobar Islands. The tide gauge at Port Blair, South Andaman, recorded gradual rise in water level by 0.9 meters from 6:50 a.m. to 7:01 a.m. that crucial day, just 2 minutes after the earthquake, compared to normal tide that would have prevailed on the 26th of December 2004, which might be due to land subsidence caused by the earthquake. At 7:25 a.m., tide gauge showed abnormally high water level at 3.39 meters, an increase of water level by 1 meter compared to level observed at 7:01 a.m., indicating the arrival of the tsunami waves. Had there been an early warning system in place, the tide gauge data would have been interpreted and the agencies forewarned for evacuation. But details like tide gauges or radars are hardly on the radar of the news editors of television news channels. I mean, just come to think of it, how many lives could have been saved? Now again I quote, as far as I know, only one ATG or acoustic tide gauge maintained by National Institute of Ocean Technology was functional at Port Blair on the 26th of December 2004. Hence, I don't know which ATGs in ANI started recording seishes and swelling in the sea around Port Blair. Theoretically, the tsunami waves should take 30 minutes to reach Port Blair. Hence, the changes in sea levels should have occurred since then. It is possible that the land sunk during the earthquake and that must have caused the apparent increase in water level. But that increase in water level is different from the changes in water level caused due to the arrival of the tsunami waves. Yes, it is possible to separate the sea level change caused by the tsunami and apparent change caused due to land subsidence. The land subsidence can be estimated using GPS data, and the same can be subtracted from the acoustic tide gauge data to get the actual height of tsunami wave or the size caused by the tsunami wave in that region, unquote, said Dr. Satish Shenoy, the then director of the Indian National Center for Ocean Information Services, to me, explaining this very patiently in an email interview to me. Disaster reporting is a specialized field and needs to be cultivated as an independent beat by media as well as official sources. In the absence of this competence, reporters can become a baggage and burden on the already stressed administration in post-disaster situations. During Phylon cyclone, for example, the eye of the storm was expected to make landfall in Gopalpur in Orissa between 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. on the 12th of October 2013. A reporter from a leading Indian television channel called the PRO, or the Public Relations Officer, or called him by the name of Media Advisor at National Disaster Management Authority of the Government of India, to ask from where he can get the best view for shooting footage. He also demanded directions to reach the best spot for filming the eye of the storm when it makes landfall. I'm quoting the PRO now. I wish I had asked him to hire a chopper and fly right into the eye of the storm, said an exasperated PRO. Such is the hunger for sensational TRP-hungry television channels. Another lead reporter from a mainstream Hindi television channel called up and said NDRF, that is the National Disaster Response Force, was not in the field when the cyclone was expected to make landfall. The administration had evacuated the population, so NDRF personnel too had to stay safe. The reporter was making the issue because she was caught in the storm and was waiting for the NDRF to rescue her. To cover up the fact that she was not meant to be outdoors, she wanted to make a story on the fact that the NDRF was not deployed. A call from the Delhi headquarters later from the television channel helped us figure out the inside story of the reporter. Her camera batteries were dying and hence they wanted to charge the batteries, for which she was blackmailing the NDMA that they, the channel, would do a negative story against the NDRF. Electricity supply had been disconnected in anticipation of the cyclone, and these reporters wanted priority power supply to charge camera batteries. The fact that the electricity supply had been precursorily outed was another case that could have been a story. It should be always post disaster, immediately after the cyclone makes a landfall, that the power supply is switched off so that to prevent further electricity. But if you do it before itself, and if the cyclone changes path at the last minute, it's a big story then. So these are things that that needs training. National Disaster Management Authority and state authorities were nevertheless preoccupied organizing food, shelter, medicines, and logistics for final evacuation, and frankly, none could care less to help her recharge batteries at 0 hour, said the PRO to me in an exclusive conversation when I was doing this book. In Ganjam district during Cyclone Phyllis, a leading television news channel reporter called the National Disaster Management Authority's PRO to tell us that 10,000 people were stranded in the presence of an MLA. They told NDMA, that is the National Disaster Management Authority, that they are ready to give negative coverage for NDMA. We called the state government to cross-check but found it untrue. We realized that it was an attempt to blackmail us. We eventually realized that MLA had conflict with the deputy commissioner or the district collector, that he wanted to settle his scores by using media. Vested interests cannot be discerned by media unless they know the location very well, the PRO told me. In Uttarakhand, during the so-called Himalayan tsunami, media personnel utilized Army and Indian Air Force helicopters during the Rickies on day 2 to cover their story. Such was the opportunism of the media, said one exasperated NDMA PRO to me in an exclusive discussion on the 12th of August 2014. Quote, later they criticized the armed forces for not living up to the challenge. But a seasoned perspective to this incident only underscores the need for financial security for reporters. Reporters need to be given credit cards and must have enormous financial support to meet with unexpected expenses during the field's reportage. This does not happen in India, despite a robust and free press. Profits from advertising revenue become the coveted possession of the publishing house and owners. Profits remain uninvested into the media, an expensive mistake for the fourth estate. Governments and organizations like the USGS, UNISDR, FEMA, JDMA, INCOIS, JTIC, ITIC, UNESCO, PTWC, ADPC, and the NDMA. Now, let me expand on the abbreviations of this alphabet soup. USGS is the United States Geological Survey. FEMA is Federal Emergency Management Authority. JDMA is the Japanese Disaster Management Authority. INCOIS means Indian National Center for Ocean Information Services. JTIC is the Jakarta Tsunami Information Center. ITIC is Indonesian Tsunami Information Center. UNESCO is the UN Education Scientific Cultural Organization. PTWC is the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center. ADPC means Asia Disaster Preparedness Center. NDMA means National Disaster Management Authority of the Government of India. UK Rapid Rescue, Technisches Hilfswerk of Germany, and think tanks, INGOs like GIZ, for example, etc., need to extend or offer training for media personnel interested in covering disasters in every federal and provincial capital, in every city, country, and region and territory. Media's responsibility is not all about political desks from the state and country capitals. In the day and age of climate change, anticipating consequences of causes makes competent content. Information dissemination serves the purpose of outreach quite literally. 20-30 years ago, a prerequisite for a reporter was a master's degree in political science, but it helped if the reporters had good general knowledge. Today, however, national security also means security of the people, and sound background knowledge is necessary to report on all current affairs. National security includes postal security from the elements and the Mother Earth's secret weapons of mass destruction. Take, for instance, the recent volcanic eruption in Tonga in Southwest Pacific Ocean. Apart from the print and Down to Earth in India, both of whom picked up a blogging channel, there has not been one mainstream publication or electronic media's in-depth report on the impact of the volcano on, say, El Nino, on currents, monsoons, and atmospheric conditions for the Indian Ocean rim countries. What will be the impact of the volcanic explosion breaking the sound barrier on the atmospheric currents in South Asia, for instance? No coverage in South Asia as far as I know. The media has a right and a duty to report the truth, but there must be an agreed ethical code of conduct, not to be confused with the government dictate, which is a bad idea. In the aftermath of a natural disaster, the immediate efforts of everyone are focused on saving lives. While criticism of the government's inadequacies is often justifiable, efforts at saving lives have to get priority. Requests for rides on rescue helicopters and other rescue vehicles should be treated as unethical. Also, showing pictures of people or the dead bodies should be carefully screened to take pictures of the sensitivities of their kith and kin. It would also be a good idea if all channels pool information on missing persons and pass on the same to the disaster management authorities rather than each one putting pressure on an already strained system. Regional biases in reporting could be avoided since the rescue protocols do not and should not recognize regional identities. A common fund by the media for rehabilitation would be more effective than each media house doing individual relief efforts, said Nanda Kumar, former member of India's National Disaster Management Authority in charge of agriculture-related disasters. In the immediate aftermath of a natural or a man-made calamity, the media can save lives, limbs, and livestock by broadcasting and publishing or disseminating the do's and don'ts for survivors. For this, state-of-the-art brick-and-click economic powerhouses that modern media are, media houses and studios need to be self-reliant. Media houses and studios must have ready-made dossiers comprising of Plan A, that includes do's and don'ts, demographic databases, research material, contact persons database or directory, civil list of officers, ranks, responsibilities, and contact details, along with timings for meetings and contact, infrastructure maps, geographical atlases, revenue maps, topo sheets, database of natural resources, bio and zoodiversity, database of anthropological and demographic diversity, linguistic heritage of a place, including the languages spoken in a particular region or a place, financial or revenue database that includes tax patterns, incomes, expenditure, and consumption patterns, gazette publications, not just in the library, but should have been read, digested, and made note of by the specialist beat reporters. Forms for media accreditation and privileges. Reporters and crews must be trained in ethics. Let us not forget that 2 CNN reporters lost their job in Iraq, one for smuggling an artifact stolen from the museum in Babylon, and another for not cross-checking facts before reporting it during the first Gulf War in 1991. Professional detachment, how to cross-check facts and figures and collecting anecdotes. Research material, conducting interviews, location planning for filming and photography should all be part of training for disaster beat reporters. Plan B must be for state information publicity departments to be able to give all this even to the evening newspaper reporter from a hinterland district who might not be able to afford all the above mentioned resources. That is how capacity building for district level newspaper personnel can be undertaken while on the job. State departments of information and publicity have massive budgets. This should be made available to district level newspapers to put up their newspapers and publication or content online on websites. That way, budgets can be put to better use instead of spending it on entertainment allowances, on which budgets are watered down in state departments of information and publicity. India's democratic ethos and legacy of free press support this kind of infrastructure support, something that cannot be expected or equated in other South Asian disaster-prone neighbors like Pakistan, Sri Lanka, the Maldives, Myanmar, Thailand, or Indonesia. The media's role in cross-checking facts cannot be overemphasized in the day and age of social media overdose. Media has to be a gatekeeper of facts, not fiction. The lines blur when both wire news as well as social media feeds draw up on the internet. Rumor mongering, especially on interfaces like social media, can wreak havoc. For example, on the 11th of April 2012, when INCOIS, that is Indian National Center for Ocean Information Services in Hyderabad, in India, had sounded a tsunami watch for 3 islands in Nicobars after a strike-slip earthquake off the coast of West Sumatra, Facebook users on the west coast of US apparently were alarmed to find alerts of unwarranted warnings. All through 2011, especially after the mega Japanese earthquake and tsunami, there were any number of doomsday prophecies on YouTube, Facebook, and other social media of disasters having begun to take shape as the world was coming to an end on 2012. The 11th of April strike-slip earthquake off the west coast of Sumatra was but a convenient tool for doomsday prophets. Rana Mathew, who was the PRO of the Union Territory Administration of Andaman and Nicobar Islands in the Bay of Bengal at the time of the Asian tsunami, coordinated the media personnel's visit to tsunami-hit Nicobar Islands, told me in an exclusive interview, and I quote him, the administration did not have knowledge of tsunamis in the region before December 2004. So then there was no question of disseminating information from the Information and Publicity Department. The officialdom itself was overwhelmed. Adds Mathew, I think the administration was not prepared for such a calamity. It took them some time to put their act together. The government of India created the Unified Relief Command, merging the civil and military assets, which was the best decision perhaps. In hindsight, I think the relief and rescue operations undertaken by the administration was probably one of the best ever in India. The local population was panicking, and there were about 4,000 tourists on that day in the islands. They all wanted to go back as soon as possible. Plus, the officers and the employees who were on deputation on the islands from other parts of India also wanted to get back. So it was pretty chaotic initially, adds Rana Mathew. On the day the tsunami struck, aiding a perplexed, you-were-foddered administration was Mathew. Quoting Mathew, I was called to the office at 9 a.m. by the director and was asked to be in office as a review meeting was going on, headed by the then Lieutenant Governor. After the meeting, the Lieutenant Governor went on an aerial tour of the southern islands, which took the maximum impact of the tsunami. After this tour, I was asked to issue the first press release on the status of loss of lives and destruction and relief actions planned. By 27th of December, we had the entire global media on the islands. I think I was in the thick of managing them. We decided to have a daily evening briefing by the Lieutenant Governor and the Commander-in-Chief of the Joint Relief Command. Subsequently, every day evening, we used to update the press with the latest news on relief and rescue efforts. Now let me shift focus to a war horizon. In Syria, BBC's support to rebels was only comparable to UK's covert support to rebels with chemical weapons as it emerged in late July 2014. Embedded journalism, especially in wars, civil strife, is challenged by one-sided reporting at the risk of putting at stake credibility and even objectivity. In this regard, NDTV's independent reporting of the ISIS crisis in Iraq in June-July 2014, as well as in the Gaza conflict of July-August 2014, are shining examples of independent coverage without vested interests and agenda-driven reportage. Another example of reporting in a man-made disaster is Syria itself and the BBC's reporting of the Arab Spring. I have immense regard and respect for the BBC and not a day goes by without me listening to a BBC bulletin. But the BBC almost seemed to have a vested interest or a political agenda in seeing democratic results in the Arab Spring. BBC is synonymous with democracy as tsunami is synonymous with disaster in the Andaman Nicobar Islands. BBC's reporting of the capture and killing of Libyan dictator Gaddafi was almost euphoric, with a hitherto unknown BBC reporter lauding over the corpse of the slain leader, posing to the cameras with a trophy, Gaddafi's slain corpse, as if to prove the BBC was right in supporting the Arab Spring. The BBC has failed to highlight the inadequacies and the loopholes of legislative democracies. It accounted for Indian media's glee at a coalition government's formation in the UK. Disaster reportage has a great potential for growth as it offers multiple avenues for specialization. It also bears the responsibility of saving countless lives in the day and age of climate change-induced hydrometeorological disasters. But that demands international competence, grip of the media, and extensive general knowledge and background knowledge. Matrix of reliable, cultivated sources, credibility is central. Exposure to earth sciences is quintessential indeed. Writers have onerous responsibilities, naturally. Let us study this by examples and case studies. We have read in avid detail the media's ignorance of the tsunami and how it cost millions of people their lives and millions of dollars in economic terms. That learning and executing responsibility go hand in hand can be learned from the following example. On this link, which you just went by, the BBC Monitoring has gathered snippets of Indian press coverage of the Pune landslide in June-July 2014. BBC Monitoring mentions the Times of India covering the Pune landslide, where the Times of India reports that it was a man-made disaster in the making. Well, instead of crying horse after the event, if only the media keeps an eye on breach of laws, like say deforestation on the hill, which caused the mudslide, there is every hope of being able to avoid or mitigate an imminent disaster. If journalism is pen-aided activism, it can indeed make a positive difference. It ought to. If all the news media keeps a tab on breach of all laws, which any conscientious media professional must do, then automatically recipes for disasters can be lessened and hopefully avoided. The recipes for disaster will obviously reduce with robust media scrutiny. When, for instance, the Times of India reported that the Pune landslide was a man-made disaster caused by deforestation on the fragile hill slopes of the Western Ghats and triggered by the monsoons, it emerges logically then that this was a recipe for disaster. Long years of deforestation was ignored by the same media. It is essential for the media to anticipate calamities like the ones induced by seasonal changes. Summer implies anticipation of drought, famine, and heat wave in tropical South Asia. These can have an impact on the whole gamut of human activities: construction, industrial production, supply of raw materials, agriculture, food security, nutrition index, public health, economy, trade, tax infrastructure, subsidies, insurance, and politically, they can keep the governments in South Asia on the edge. Monsoon implies anticipating landslides and mudslides, flash floods, and possibly as a consequence, power crisis, epidemics following the breach of water and sanitation infrastructure damage. Each of these consequences of monsoon can have deleterious impact on human landscapes, agricultural and industrial output, food security, public health, domestic and international trade, food inflation, agricultural subsidies, crop insurance prices, fishing, and in turn the whole economy. All these factors cause gender violence, sexual crimes, domestic abuse, forced labor, economic upheavals like child marriages. It changes the whole social fabric. Vulnerable people like tribals, frail, infirm, elderly, pregnant women, children, homeless people, and the physically challenged people, as well as people living with mental health challenges, are the most vulnerable in emergencies and will more likely suffer from malnutrition as a consequence. These are the aspects for beat reporters to check preparedness for. Similarly, winter implies anticipating and preparing for the cold waves. The homeless people, frail, infirm children, physically challenged people, and people living with mental health issues, tribals, are much more vulnerable during extreme cold. Climate change has heralded heightened summers, winters, and monsoons, especially in the middle latitudes. Climate change affects different people differently in different parts of the world, having both long-term and near-term implications. I'll just take a break. I need to drink water. When El Nino Southern Oscillation occurs once every few years, the whole cycle goes completely awry, making the job of meteorologists so much more challenging. When El Nino occurs, it has on occasion washed out winters in Europe, brought forward snowfall to autumn, and ruined agriculture with pummeling rains in Europe. El Nino has accounted for bleached corals and increased monsoons around the Indian Ocean rim states, triggered flash floods, accentuated droughts, and forest fires. The impact of El Nino on the tropical countries and economies are much more intimidating to the entire polity and economy. El Nino can drastically affect microclimate in every part of the world. Glacial melt in the Himalayas can cause unseasonal avalanches and thereby unseasonal hailstorms and flash floods. Dr. B.N. Goswami, Director, Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, Pune, explained in an exclusive email interview to me, El Nino is a natural phenomenon, not disaster by itself. It produces influence on the global climate through which it leads to different types of disasters in different parts of the world. Drought as a subject is allocated to Ministry of Agriculture in India. Drought mitigation is a multidisciplinary drought mitigation is a multidisciplinary function, I beg your pardon. The dynamics of each drought varies with regard to its severity, location, and extent. While policy guidelines have been prescribed by National Disaster Management Authority, in actual practice, a number of location-specific decisions have to be taken in time to mitigate the effects of drought. These include inter alia, alternate options for crops, food and nutrition management, provision of drinking water, fodder management and health-related issues, said Mr. Nandakumar, former member of India's National Disaster Management Authority, in an exclusive interview given to me. These location-specific measures that Mr. Nandakumar refers to are administrative best practices implemented at the local level. For instance, in the Indian state of Karnataka, if the summer temperature exceeds 38 degrees centigrade, drought is declared and the administration is obliged to provide extra water to every household. Such guidelines have to be in the background knowledge of reporters. This calls for extensive training and continuous refresher courses. Administrators too need to know the pressure under which reporters work. Drought affects the economy in many ways. In a country like India, the immediate worries are of food security and food inflation. The news about a possible drought starts a debate on the likely negative impact on growth, impact on inflation, power shortage, and drinking water. What gets missed out in the big debate are issues of livelihood security, hunger, undernourishment, and livestock management, says Mr. Nandakumar. Most significantly, the impact of drought on water and sanitation can have extremely hazardous and deleterious impact on vulnerable rural population. This can ruin the export-oriented agricultural income of apple country in both Himachal Pradesh in India and Switzerland in Europe. When trade-distorting subsidies of the World Trade Organization regime are opposed by countries like India on account of food security, India risks isolation in international trade. It is an area that has been neglected by the independent Indian media. Drought in most cases is caused by inadequate rainfall during a particular interval of time. But the impact of drought can vary and is the consequence of a number of actions and inactions of the government, society, and private individuals. Policies and practices with regard to water conservation and management, cropping systems, exploitation or overexploitation of groundwater, water use policies, access to common water bodies, inefficient use of water, etc., affect the impact of a drought, Mr. Nandakumar added. The disaster beat reporters have their work cut out. In late winter, as the cold wave starts receding, beat reporters can start scrutinizing if the authorities and the nodal agencies and departments have identified vulnerable populations, made arrangements for protection of the vulnerable population in heat waves, including information dissemination for prevention, anointment of shelters, food and civil supplies, medical preparedness, interview the identified vulnerable population and publish or broadcast their fears and apprehensions, needs, etc., which may invite corporate sponsorship of disaster mitigation. Often the vulnerable population are those who cannot afford to lose a day's wages and toil in the harsh sunlight in places prone to heat wave. Reporters also need to scrutinize if taxpayers' funding is being used appropriately. Similarly, beat reporters need to scrutinize in late summer if nodal agencies are prepared for monsoons. This can include investigative reporting on maintenance of water piers, plugging of leaking sewage infrastructure and clearance of encroachments, clearance of silt in reservoirs and dams. If targets for watershed management like soil conservation, agroforestry, check dam construction, rainwater harvesting, etc. have been met, talk to identified vulnerable population and voice their apprehension in print. Beat reporters also can research thoroughly geological issues like El Nino, climate change, etc., and try to document near-term and long-term impacts of the past occurrence of these events. In preparation for winter months, similarly, beat reporters have to scrutinize preparedness by talking to identified vulnerable populations, check preparatory infrastructure, document preparedness measures, and so on. The Fourth Estate must publicize missing people's registry to help reunite missing survivors of calamities. It is much more significant than emotional stories aimed at higher TRP ratings on television. In between, reporters have to cultivate researchers and scientists, research on issues, and publish stories related to triggers and causes for natural disasters in a planned and structured series. If this module can be replicated by trained reporters in every district level, or newspaper or magazine or publication portal, radio or television channels in all 604 districts of India, then the press would have played out its responsible role in disaster mitigation. Beat reporters must also cultivate trust of the scientific community in real time. In fact, in this regard, former Vice Chairman of India's National Disaster Management Authority, Mr. Shashidhar Reddy, told me in an exclusive interview in the aftermath of the Uttarakhand flash floods of June 2013, quote, if there is a specific warning, all broadcasters, regardless of them being private or public broadcasters, should interrupt normal programming to disseminate the early warning and forecasts. This protocol must be developed and put in place. In this regard, New Zealand's Civil Defence Department has put in place a best practice called Memorandum of Understanding. The link should come up sometime here. Are drawn up with all the media in the public and private sector to make it obligatory for broadcasters to disseminate early warning during emergencies. Such best practices should be universalized in the interest of disaster mitigation. At the risk of repeating, it is copied here again from Chapter 3. Circumventing safety instructions, breach of laws, lowering standards in the administration of all spheres of economic and human activities are recipes for man-made disasters. These are what cause building collapses. We have suffered building collapses in monsoon every year in Mumbai, and the New Year 2014 celebrations in Goa were quickly overshadowed with a building collapse. These are typical disasters that an alert media ought to incessantly report about. Granted, it is a fine line highlighting the larger picture for a national audience, but editors' competence lies in editing copy that serves the interests of local and national readers and audience, as well as public interest and scrutinizing polity. In the decades since the Asian tsunami, the media has matured a great deal indeed, and there is barely a day that goes by on World Service broadcasting channels without reportage of one or another type of either a natural or a man-made disaster. In fact, the Kosi River flood of August 2008 certainly bears no repetition. It seems the lessons have thankfully been learned. Preventive evacuation of 20,000 people living downstream of the Kosi River had been evacuated since the 2nd of August 2014 as preparatory measures after a landslide in upstream Kosi in Nepal on Friday, the 1st of August 2014, the previous day. The press or the Fourth Estate may not have played a pivotal role to take credit for this, but public documentation helps infinitely in dissemination. Constructive multimedia dissemination is vital. Both the National Disaster Management Authority and the National Disaster Response Force in India have been releasing press releases every couple of hours during the recent disasters like Cyclone Phylon and the Pune landslide, Chennai building collapse, Orissa floods of July 2014, etc. This has certainly helped beat reporters and thereby information dissemination. The hourly bulletins from the PRO cell in National Disaster Response Force and the NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority, got so confusing on Monday, 4th of August 2014, when the PRO's offices were simultaneously issuing releases both about the Pune landslide and the preventive evacuation in the Kosi floods. That the PRO cell of NDRF issued a note saying 114 bodies had been recovered in Pune. Immediately, Manish Kumar and Anasuya Roy from NDTV issued rejoinders saying 114 dead bodies had been recovered from Bihar of the Kosi floods, not Pune. It was a big and expensive mistake committed by the PRO NDRF. We are awaiting clarification from the PRO NDRF. The clarification from PRO NDRF did not come. It was a very expensive mistake. I have written this on the day when, obviously, on the 4th of August 2014, when we received these kind of bulletins. The Mumbai urban floods of 26 July 2014 was a man-made disaster waiting to happen. The urban floods occurred due to blockage of stormwater drains and encroachment of open spaces meant to drain rainwater. Torrential rains exacerbated the problem. The main trigger for the flood was the torrential rain of 994 millimeters or 39.1 inches. While torrential rainfall within a 24-hour period was the primary cause for the disaster that claimed 5,000 lives, the recipe for the disaster in the making was largely ignored. Encroachment did not happen overnight. If the media had reported in the years before the Mumbai flood the scale of encroachment and the dangerous consequences thereof, maybe, just maybe, the disaster could have been prevented or at least reduced in impact. At the same time, it is essential to avoid sensationalism. Sensationalism must be avoided at all costs. When earth-shaking events like the mega earthquake and the tsunami or a volcanic eruption happens, it is easier to sensationalize things by unnecessarily accentuating some aspects, says Dr. Arun Bapat, seismological consultant. In the June 9, 2014, for example, the Times of India reported that magma flow was discovered in a remote village in Kangra district of Himachal Pradesh in India. This link will be put up here and also in the description box. This report was commendable in that it highlighted the fact that the media is now proactive in reporting on causes for natural calamities, earth sciences, and is making an attempt to widen the news net, as it were. Credible sources have been quoted in the article. If a whole new volcanic site is indeed emerging in an otherwise seismically active area, it is obviously something earth-shaking. However, if this magma chamber increases its potency and lives and livelihoods are at risk, who then will pay the price for ignoring this alarmist news report? When the media makes a credible claim to early warning, it should obviously not be taken lightly. On the other hand, media moguls need to curb sensationalism too. The best practice, as is mentioned in the report, is to follow up with the scientific community for any leads on early warning of an imminent seismic event in a whole new place for geological activity. But it had not been picked up in the national media. That means one of two things. Either the national media satraps have dismissed the credibility of this report, or the authorities have dismissed the report of magmatic activity in Himachal Pradesh as sensational. In view of this author, that is me, it was a case of an over-enthusiastic junior reporter who was lost in an exaggerated sense of forecast of an unrelated, imagined event. It emerged that what looked like subterranean magma was actually molten soil caused by melting of electric poles and the electricity supply discharged from the wires to the soil. Dr. Bapat, seismological consultant in Pune, commented in detail, I quote, "Such so-called volcanoes occur in our country periodically. I have read the news carefully and found it to be a result of a so-called investigating journalism and totally lacks an understanding on the part of the Geological Survey of India, who had commented apparently and had been quoted in the news report." And that is all for tonight. In 15 to 20 minutes time, by about 10 p.m. or 8:15 p.m., I will go online again to answer questions. Yeah, this was the first part of chapter 18, Media Guidelines for Disaster Reporting. It will be concluded in the next week's reading. So I shall meet you online for a question answer session in about 20 minutes time. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in. Take care. Keep smiling. Until we meet again in tonight's live and next week's video. Take care. Stay home. Stay safe. Ciao.